This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 563, entitled, How Will Women Feel When Men Close Their Masculist Ranks on Them? Description. What would it feel like for women, for monoconscious feminists, to live in an era when nearly all men have been masculisted, who don't tolerate fluffies nor monoconscious feminists with their gender political misandrist bias that gender oppression is a one-way street, when the masculists are all too conscious that in reality women oppress men far worse than vice versa? When millions of monoconscious feminists are having their fucking heads bitten off by very angry, hateful masculists for their misandrist bigotry, then these women will be forced to become biconscious, or they will be forced to rot on the shelf, manless, dying a slow, miserable death, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. Now the flyer itself. How will women feel when men close their masculist ranks on them? By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. In gender political terms, we live in a gynocentric age. Women have had a monopoly over gender politics for the past 6 decades, so take it for granted that gender oppression is a one-way street, that women are the oppressed and that men are the oppressors. Feminism teaches women nothing about how women oppress men. So millions of feminists feel fully justified in being angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, the patriarchy, etc. But know nothing about the reverse direction, because they hear nothing about this from feminism, which the masculists describe as monoconscious, that is, having had only one consciousness raised, that is, one's feminist consciousness, and know nothing about what the masculists are saying, that is, these monoconscious feminists are not biconscious. That is, they have not had both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised, which makes such monoconscious feminists rather feminazi bitchy in the eyes of the biconscious masculists, who much prefer to have relationships with biconscious feminists, since the latter have had their feminist anger at men for the ways that men oppress women cancelled by their female masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. Because these women are biconscious, by definition, they are aware and have been informed of masculist ideas. That is, they are aware of how women oppress men, and in fact worse than vice versa, since the masculists have taught them that many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, which makes them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. For example, the big 3 gender crimes that women commit against men are women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, and women's forced fathering, which are individually horrific gender crimes against men that cause masculists to hate women who commit these horrible gender crimes against men. This flyer envisages a time, not many years away from now, in which so many men are familiar with masculist ideas that women will no longer have the luxury to express their monoconscious bias publicly through fear of having, quote, their fucking heads bitten off by very angry, hateful masculists in their audiences at public talks or in their social circles, who do not tolerate monoconscious feminazi bigots, that's MFBs, and crush them when they come across them. This flyer asks how women will feel when men close their masculist ranks on women, teaching women, harassing women to adopt a biconscious view of gender politics or suffer heavy punishment from men, from biconscious, masculisted men, who are strongly angered by the monoconscious gender bias of feminists who preach that men are the gender oppressors, when the masculists feel that the reality is a lot more, in the opposite direction, that in fact women oppress men far worse, given the big three mentioned above. So how are women going to feel when men, biconscious, masculisted men, rise up and crush women who continue to hold monoconscious views, who continue to propagate their monoconscious feminazi bias and hence have their fucking heads bitten off? Initially, there will probably be many, millions in fact, of verbally bitter, verbally violent confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists, when the masculists express their contempt for the gender political bias of the monoconscious feminists, who paint a picture that gender oppression is a one-way street, when it is all too clear to the biconscious masculists that gender oppression is very much a two-way street. The biconscious masculists see the monoconscious feminists as MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, as shibbers, in brackets, SHB equals, sexist, hypocritical bigots, and snap at them, expressing their contempt and hatred of these misandrist myopics, who fail to see that in fact women oppress men worse due to women's decades-lasting gender crimes against men. What is going to be really shocking for such monoconscious feminists will be confronting men for the first time who really answer back. And not only answer back, but use their male superior intelligence and their greatly superior male verbal aggression to crush the arguments of the monoconscious feminists. Remember, the feminists have had a monopoly over gender politics for 6 decades, so are not accustomed to being the butt of masculist tirades and masculist ideological force who slam back at the feminazis with powerful masculist arguments that the monoconscious feminists are powerless to respond to. Masculist ideas are, in general, more powerful than feminist arguments, since masculist arguments are more science-based, more reality-based, whereas feminist arguments are more wishful thinking-based, preaching to women what women desperately want to hear from the feminists, that is, that women are as capable as men, that women have equal abilities as men, etc. So millions of feminists are going to have to adapt to masculists biting their fucking heads off in public talks, in private conversations. Many relationships between monoconscious feminists and freshly minted biconscious masculists will end as the masculists become conscious of the bigoted monoconsciousness of their girlfriends, become disgusted with them and then dump them. Or the monoconscious feminists become pissed off with the new biconscious aggressiveness of their masculist boyfriends and dump them. Either way, these monoconscious feminists will end up boyfriendless, millions of them, until it dawns on them that they are being left rotting on the shelf while their former boyfriends are pairing off with biconscious feminists who are more open-minded, who really listen to what the biconscious masculists are saying. From the masculist viewpoint, biconscious feminists are much nicer to be with, since biconscious feminists have lost their monoconscious feminazi bitchiness, since that bitchiness has been cancelled by the oppositely directed bitchiness of the masculists towards women who commit massive gender crimes against men. In fact, the masculists consciously, deliberately, politically, actively target the monoconscious boyfriends of monoconscious feminists, teaching them masculist ideas so that these monoconscious boyfriends become biconscious, then see their monoconscious feminist girlfriends as bigots, become disgusted with them and then dump them, millions of them, to the point that the sheer bulk of biconscious masculists, millions of them, will force monoconscious feminists to bother to learn masculist ideas, or they will be drowned by the masculist tsunami that will be thundering down on them. When nearly all men have been influenced by masculinist ideas, the monoconscious bias of feminists who insist on the idea that gender oppression is a one-way street will not be tolerated and will be verbally attacked. Millions of women in the next few years will experience the personal confrontation of a man spitting in her face for her monoconscious feminazi bitchery, screaming at her for her bigotry, her hypocrisy, her sexism, by telling her that women oppress men worse, and that this decade is men's decade, and that men refuse to have relationships with monoconscious feminazi cunts and utterly reject them. When there are so many masculists around, women will have no choice but to adapt to this new reality and be forced to become biconscious, or they will effectively be exterminated by being forced into a slow, miserable death, by being forced into manlessness. Once nearly all men have been masculisted, that is, influenced by very powerful masculist ideas, then feminist monoconsciousness will die out due to its bigotry and ignorance, its preaching that gender oppression is a one-way street, when to most of society, by then, will be aware that that is definitely not the case, that gender oppression is very much a two-way street. So that those feminists who preach monoconsciousness are seen to be MFBs, monoconscious feminazi bigots, who will be badly punished by being made manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. Young women will be terrified at the rise of biconscious masculism and will adapt quickly to learn masculist ideas because they really want to have a baby and need a man in their life if they do not want to have to raise it on their own, which is almost impossible. One can't be both a full-time mother and a full-time careerist. The two are incompatible. Masculist ideas will cause fluffies to die out. Masculists have a real hatred of fluffies, seeing them as manslaving, divorce-raping, gender criminals who need to be wiped out. As masculinist ideas spread, most women will learn that men hate fluffies and will react strongly towards fipping up, or they know that they will be much less likely to be able to find a man who is prepared to tolerate her monoconscious fluffy views, and instead will just spit in her face, utterly rejecting her, yelling at her that she's a gender criminal, a manslaving, divorce-raping parasite, that is vermin to be exterminated, wiped off the face of the earth. Masculists see that, thanks to men. Women now have a career window of half a century, so have a powerful moral obligation to fip up or be exterminated, forced to die a slow, miserable death, rotting on the shelf, punished by men by not getting one. It will not be nice being a fluffy, nor a monoconscious feminist in an era in which masculinist ideas are widespread, which have influenced nearly all men, who no longer tolerate fluffies nor monoconscious feminists, who utterly reject such women and spit in their face. When men close their masculist ranks on women, then women will either adapt or become fips and biconscious, or they will be blown away by the force of the masculist tirade, the masculist tsunami that is coming, as the numbers of men who become masculisted grows and grows, building a massive tsunami wave that will crush all before it. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 560 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.